Hi everybody and welcome to Paleo Cooking Live. Today I'm showing you some food freedom recipes for the 4th of July. I'm feeling very patriotic today and I thought some desserts would be appropriate for the weekend. So the first thing I want to show you is a berry tart. Now keep in mind, all of these recipes are going to be grain-free and either have very little sugar or very low processed sugar, natural sugars like honey and coconut sugar. So if you want to try any of these recipes, it may require a little bit of an investment in the ingredients, but trust me when I tell you, they really are so good, and I defy anyone to tell me that they're any different from the sugary, glutinous recipes you're accustomed to. So give these a try. They're a healthier option, and I think you'll like them. The first thing I want to show you is a mixed berry tart. It's perfect for the holidays. It's got red and blue with blueberries, raspberries, and strawberries. And also it's a great way to use up any fruit that might be getting a little past its prime. And I just love being able to use everything up so nothing goes to waste. Let me grab the ingredients for you. So I have my oven preheated to 350 degrees. And what I'm gonna do here is I have 2 cups of almond flour. And this is an unbleached almond flour, so it still has the skins, inside when the almond flour is ground up. Don't think that this isn't anything, unusual. It's basically just ground up almonds. And to that, I'm going to add some ghee, 2 tablespoons of ghee. You can use coconut oil melted. This ghee is pretty soft because it's already kind of room temperature, so I don't have to melt it. If you do melt it, just kind of let it cool a little bit so it doesn't cook the egg. Just gonna scoop that right in, 2 tablespoons of ghee. And again, ghee is just clarified butter. We take the dairy solids out and you can buy it in stores. I like the grass-fed kind, but you can get anything you want. And then next, I'm just gonna crack in 1 egg. And there's a teaspoon of salt also added. I already put that in with the almond flour. And I'm just gonna kind of whip up this egg a little bit in the corner. And now with 2 forks, I'm just gonna stir this together. So all these ingredients come together. And what I'm looking for is all of the dry getting wet. It's just gonna kind of absorb the fat from the egg and the butter. I call ghee butter, it's interchangeable. And I want it to get to like a pea-sized crumb. And you can do this on a mixer. You have to watch the time because you don't want to take it too far. You want it to be crumbly. But if you did decide that you wanted to turn this into a dough, you could take it the whole way. So it would be like a dough held together. And you could use that after you refrigerate it slightly to get it nice and cold. You can use that to roll out and use it just like any other pie or tart dough or a crust for maybe a lemon square. I like to use this crumbly version as a crust for a lemon square. That recipe will be coming another day. I'm still perfecting the mix. So this is just about right, and you can see it took no time at all. And I'm not using any fancy equipment, it's just the ingredients. Get that out from between the tines of the fork. And I think 2 forks work better than 2 knives, but if you have a pastry cutter, you can do that too. And then I'm just gonna press this. You can see how it's crumbly, but if I squeeze it, it's gonna hold together. So that's exactly how we want it. So all I'm gonna do, because I want this to be mini tartlets, is I'm just gonna prepare a muffin tin. So all I'll do, there's a lot of butter in this too, but I just like to give it a little extra. This is an avocado oil spray. And I'm just gonna lightly coat 6 of these because this will make about 6. And then I'll take about a handful of the mix, like that, and drop it right in. So now I'm pressing into the bottom first because I want the bottom to be substantial. It's going to be holding some really juicy fruits when they bake. And with my thumb, I'm going to start pushing up against the sides until I get it all the way around. And again, make sure that it goes all the way up the sides. You don't have to worry about a dough like this shrinking in the oven. Sometimes that happens with certain kinds of doughs. It also helps to refrigerate it slightly before you put it in the oven. Another trick when you're baking, because we're gonna bake these just a little bit before we put the fruit in. They're gonna bake for about 10 to 12 minutes, so they're gonna look a little more opaque than this, and they're gonna have a slightly golden color. But one of the tricks that I used to do all the time is called baking blind. So for something like this, I just take one of these simple paper cups that you use for muffins or cupcakes, and I flip it inside out. And the reason I flip it inside out is because now it's no longer got that round bottom. It's just gonna be more flat. And I would put that inside the dough so it fits tight up against the sides, and then fill it with rice or beans. And what that does is it weighs it down. You can see I have these already done because I just reuse them whenever I need them. I have them already. So I would just take this and drop it right in, and I would just bake it normally. I might add a couple of extra minutes just to make sure that the bottom really gets nice and firm. In this case, we don't need to do blind baking, but I always recommend trying it because I think it's important to make sure that the center of the bottom doesn't puff up, and this helps prevent that. So we would go ahead and do all 6 of these, just like we would for as many as we want to make. And then we can reserve a little bit of this crust if we want to do a crumb topping, which I think we're going to do today. So let me show you what these look like finished. Once these are baked, now you can see because I didn't bake them blind, they did puff up a little bit in the center, but they went back down again. And it's a nice firm cookie crust. These will pop right out if you just run a sharp knife around the edges. So next, I'm going to show you how to do the berry filling. Just put these away and grab the berries. And again, like I said, so many times we just want to use up those blueberries or strawberries that are starting to look a little overripe. And this is a great way to do that. You know, in the restaurant business, we used to take all the leftover fruits or any fruits that were starting to turn, and we couldn't use them as garnish or in salads, and we would make sorbet of the day. So that's one of those little tricks that people aren't supposed to know. So I've already cut up some strawberries, and I'm gonna cut up a few more because I want you to keep in mind when you're cutting up fruit for something like a tart, the size of the bite. So with these strawberries, I just made them like about a 1/2 inch, not even 3/4 inch big. They are gonna cook down, so you don't want them to be so tiny that they get, you know, liquidy. But you do wanna make sure that when you're putting them into a small crust, you can pack them in and have very little air. So I'm just slicing it in half and then going through it a few times. And the total for 6 of these tarts is gonna be about 3 cups. We're gonna do about a 1/2 cup of fruit into each crust. So I have some blueberries. Just gonna add some of those. This is gonna equal about 3 cups when we're done. Oh goodness, make sure there's no stems in there. That's the thing with organic, right? They are truly unprocessed. And then I have some raspberries. Raspberries always seem to go bad first. These are a little wet, but they're still usable. I might not throw them in a salad, but you know, that's gonna cook down anyway. So the juice has already got a head start. So I'm gonna throw those in. And then with a little lemon juice, I'm gonna do about a 1/4 cup of lemon juice. I just bought these ramekins and I love them. They have markings inside, so you can just measure right in here. I've got about 2 ounces. And then I have already measured out tapioca starch and some ground nutmeg. I love nutmeg with fruit pies. It just gives it a really great flavor. And I also like mace. Mace is actually the outside of the nutmeg. So the nutmeg is the inside of the nut and the shell is the mace, which has just a little stronger flavor than the nutmeg, but either way, whatever you have. I love using starch, but I'm not fond of cornstarch. I was never had any luck with cornstarch when I baked, but tapioca starch always seemed to work for me. And a long time ago, when another pastry chef I used to work with recommended using tapioca starch, I had never heard of it. She said, oh yeah, you can get it at the Asian markets. So I would go to the Asian market and buy tapioca starch. Now you can buy it like this in a bag at the local grocery store. I buy these at Thrive Market, which is the online market that is one of my partners, and they have a really great price. This is their private brand, and it's all just really great quality. This is how the almond flour comes. This is the Bob's Red Mill. Thrive also has almond flour. This is how I get my coconut flour now. So as I said, it's a little bit of an investment for some of these ingredients, but you'll also find that they use a lot less than you would of like a conventional gluten flour. I'm gonna do a chocolate chunk cookie later, and you'll see that it uses a 1/4 cup of coconut flour. That's it. Where like a regular cookie recipe might need 1.5 cups or 2 cups of flour. So all I did here was I mixed the starch with the nutmeg and the lemon juice. I want to get those nice and combined. Again, I'm just using a fork, and then I'm going to pour it over the fruit. And that helps to dissolve the starch. The acid gives the fruit a nice flavor while it's baking, and the starch helps to thicken the juices as they bake. Now you'll know that the starch is cooked when the pies are bubbling, when that juice is kind of peeking out from between the pieces of fruit and it's nice and hot and bubbly. That's when the starch is cooked. And as soon as you take it out of the oven and that thickens up, you have just beautiful, juicy, fruity fruit tarts. So let me put this fruit away, and I'm gonna get those tart shells back out. And I also wanna show you some things that I do for portioning. One of the things that I learned early on as a pastry chef is portion control is very, very important. When you're trying to yield a specific amount out of a recipe, you have to be very careful how you portion things. So I love these portion scoops. These are something that I've been using forever and ever. I have them with all different colors, and the colors don't just make them pretty. They tell you what size the scoop is. And I'm gonna put this on the website. Today I'm gonna use the green scoop, which is the biggest one I own, and it is, I'll show you this chart. This is the chart I'm gonna put on the website. Unfortunately, my printer is almost out of ink, so the colors aren't as vibrant as they should be, but the green one is gonna be about 2 2/3 ounces. And a cup, a 1/2 cup, is usually 4 ounces liquid, but it's not gonna be 4 ounces if you weigh it. And we'll talk about the difference between weighing and measuring in a minute. If you don't have a portion scoop, just use a half cup size cup, and then you can control the portions very carefully. So I'm just gonna give these another quick stir. The other reason I like tapioca starch so much better is cornstarch tends to settle out and you get this like pasty stuff in the bottom. And with the tapioca starch rather, doesn't do that. So I'm just kind of pushing these down a little bit to make it almost level and make sure all the air is out. And I'm just gonna drop that, right into the tart shell, and you can see it's piled high, and that's okay. You're gonna defy gravity a little bit when you do this, but it's gonna cook down, so it's gonna make it nice and juicy. So I'm just gonna fill all of these guys, and then we'll put them in the oven. They're only gonna need about 25 minutes which is about the amount of time that we're gonna have together today. I use these portion scoops for cookies, for meatballs. I made meatballs last night for dinner. I use them for meatballs. I use them anytime I want something to be a consistent size. I stopped scooping my chocolate chip cookies with teaspoons a long time ago, and you know how much I like to use regular eating utensils. Sorry, I keep stepping off camera today. I don't have my camera person. I have my tripod today. So pardon me if I'm not exactly in frame the whole time. The important thing is that you see these. Just gonna take a little bit of that last bit of fruit to top these guys off. And there's a little bit of that liquid left in the bottom. I'm not gonna worry about it. They have a nice coating. And you know, in a traditional pie or tart, you would add sugar to that slurry, the slurry that I made with the lemon and tapioca starch. You're not gonna need sugar. You're not gonna miss the sugar. It's so sweet on its own. You get those natural flavors from the fruits. Your friends will never know the difference. So now I'm gonna grab this crust because we have a little bit left. And I'm just gonna crumble a little bit on the top of each of these guys. And I'm sorry if I'm not reading your questions because I have my phone so far away from the counter and I cannot see that close. So I will try and answer your questions afterwards, or you're gonna see me scoot up real close to try and read because the suspense is killing me. Okay, now because these already have the ghee or the clarified butter in the crust, we don't need to do any pats of butter or anything like that on top. That's one of those other little tricks that we sometimes do with tarts. I'm gonna pop these in the oven and I'll be right back. And I also, just FYI, I like to use a sheet pan under a muffin tin. It helps with controlling the temperature of the pan. It sits flatter and more level on the oven rack. And it also just helps with any drips. If anything were to drip out of this, it's not gonna be all over my oven. And I don't like to clean my oven. Be right back. So I set those for about 10 minutes and then I'll rotate the pan about halfway through cooking. I always like to do that. Whatever my cook time is, I cut it in half and then I rotate the pan and let it finish. It just helps even out any hot spots that you might have in your oven and just make sure that everything is evenly baked. While those are in the oven, I want to show you how to make this ice cream that is absolutely delicious. And again, I defy your friends and family to tell you that it's anything but the real thing. Let me grab the ingredients. Now this is a long process, so I'm gonna post a separate video on the whole process so you can see how it goes from start to finish. I'm just gonna do a modified version of it today. Basically what you're making is an anglaise. Anglaise is that fancy, thick, luscious vanilla sauce that you get on your plated desserts whenever you're in a restaurant. We're gonna make an anglaise with coconut milk and coconut cream because that's really all ice cream is. It's cooked anglaise. So fancy word for heavy cream with some eggs and some sugar. Instead of sugar, we're gonna use honey. So let me start by showing you, I'm just gonna do in a sauce pot, I have 1 can of organic coconut milk. It's the full fat coconut milk. Just gonna put that in here. And the water with the coconut milk, you can see it needs to be stirred together. And then I'm gonna do 1 can of coconut cream, okay? But the thing about the coconut cream is you want to pour the liquid off. So what I like to do is just kind of, actually this really got soft from being out at room temperature. If you put it in the refrigerator, the liquid will separate from the solid and that just gives it a nice, thicker consistency. But if you don't do that, it's fine, it'll work. So I'm just stirring those together. I'm gonna use a whisk. And I have two kinds of whisks. I have this very thin wired whisk, and I have this very stiff wired whisk. And depending on what I'm using or how much air I want to incorporate into something is how I would choose which whisk to use, which whisk, so that might be the best. So I'm gonna use the thin one, and the reason why is as this heats on the stove, you don't want it to stick on the bottom, which happens a lot with dairy, and it even happens with coconut milk. So you wanna bring it to an almost boil on a very slow heat, stirring occasionally. And then we're gonna add a 1/4 cup of honey. This is just raw honey. I already have it weighed out. And this is gonna be the only sweetener we need. Now, you can use this as a base for any flavor ice cream. If you wanted to add cocoa powder, I would say maybe add about a 1/4 cup of cocoa powder, or 1/2 cup if you want it to be really dark. You can add berries, you can add mint leaves, but what I always recommend is add the flavor at the end because you don't want the flavor to cook out. So I would bring this, let's say if I was doing mint ice cream, I would bring this to the almost boil, scald stage, and then I would set it aside and let the mint leaves steep in it. And then I would continue with the rest of it. So let's just, for the sake of argument, I'm gonna put this on the stove, but I'm not really gonna go through the whole process for you right now. While that would be heating, we would have 6 eggs. Now I've got some egg yolks here, and we're just gonna separate the egg yolks. So all I do to separate egg yolks, and I always have a little container of whites because you never know if you're gonna wanna make meringue or just have a really good omelet, white omelet for breakfast. So I've got some egg yolks started here. Give the egg a good crack. And if it's a fresh egg, you won't have the shell stick together with that membrane. So the white's gonna go into my whites container first, and I always keep this refrigerated. And I'm gonna let most of the white come out before I start flipping it back and forth, okay? Most of the white has already come out. Now what's left here is called the chalicé, and it's the little membrane that connects the yolk to the white. If it's a really fresh egg, you're gonna have to use your finger to kind of push it off. Now there's nothing left, but a little bit of white that will transfer over here. Get rid of that. When they're really fresh, they're a little troublesome. And that's that. That's how you separate an egg. So don't crack it in half. Don't do that back and forth thing 100 times. And definitely don't let the white run through your fingers because that's just a mess. And why would you do that? So now all I'm gonna do is whip these yolks. This is a great arm workout too. This is why I have Michelle Obama arms. I wish. So I just wanted to kind of start looking really creamy and pulled together, like that. Now, when that hot milk is ready, I'm gonna temper these yolks. And again, this is all gonna be on the other video. You slightly add the warm cream and you stir it constantly. You're bringing the yolks up to temperature without cooking them. They're gonna be your thickener. So a metal bowl really works well, but use whatever you have. Keep your hand on the side of the bowl. As soon as you feel the sides of the bowl are coming up to a warm to almost hot temperature, then you're gonna put the milk with the egg yolks back into the saucepan and stir constantly on a low heat with your whisk. Keep it moving the whole time until it gets nice and thick. And then it's gonna look like this. This is a batch I already have done. And it's gonna look like that. And here's the test. You take a tablespoon, and when you dip it in, even when it's hot, it's gonna do this. It's a little thicker now that it's cold, but this is what it's gonna do. When you draw your finger through it, it leaves a mark. it doesn't run back together. That's how you know it's done. So I can't give you a time, I can't give you a temperature, but I can give you a guideline like that. And it's just so much easier to know what to look for. So once this is completely chilled, it goes into my ice cream freezer. And if you have an ice cream machine, just follow the manufacturer's directions. Very simple, and you have amazing ice cream. So here's the ice cream. It's really hard, so you want to leave it out for about 10 minutes before you serve it. On a hot day, maybe it's even less. I've already scooped a little bit of this. You can see it's hard, but there's a reason for that. There's no stabilizers in this, and there's no preservatives. You know, there's a lot of things like carrageenan and other things that keep ice cream creamy and ready to scoop. And if you're just a little patient with it, it will get to that on its own, and it's just as delicious and creamy as the store-bought kind of ice cream. And it's fun. It's fun to make. It's fun to get the kids involved or the grandkids. And I really enjoy this. The other thing that I should mention is after you take it off the heat, you're gonna add your flavoring. As I said before, if you're using something fresh like mint leaves, you're gonna steep those a little bit. If you're using vanilla, you can just add the vanilla extract, but add it at the end so that the flavor stays pronounced. If you do it while it's cooking, you're gonna cook out all that flavor, and we don't want that to happen. The other thing you can do is if you have vanilla beans, you can just cut the bean in half, drop it in with the hot cream, and then pull it out and scrape the seeds out before you proceed with the recipe. That plumps up those beans and really adds a nice pronounced vanilla flavor. I'm gonna step in and see if I can read who's visiting me today. Paige wants to know if we can bake and freeze the tarts later. I would say serve these fresh because I think that the crust will just hold up a lot better and stay crispy. I do have to say when I made these a couple of days ago, they did get nice and crispy and stayed for a couple of days in the refrigerator. So you could probably make them a day ahead. Hi, Michelle. My cousin Barbara from New York is with us. That's awesome. Hi, Marianne. So nice to see everyone. Thanks for joining me. I'm having so much fun doing this. I hope you're enjoying it too. I'm gonna leave that ice cream out because I have a fun thing I wanna show you later. Oh, there's the tarts. I'll be right back. I'm gonna flip that pan around. Oh, and I want you to see, I'll bring them close to the camera real quick, how their fruit is starting to cook down and that crust is getting nice and brown on top. Yummy. So these are gonna get in another 10 minutes. I just turned the pan. So much about baking is, you know, longer and more precise than cooking. So I love to share baking recipes with you, but I also wanna make sure that the time that we're together is maximized. So definitely go back and check the other videos and you know, make sure that you know what the steps are start to finish, and everything's going to be on the website when we're finished here as well, okay? Another thing I wanted to talk to you about today is the difference between weighing and measuring. Most home cooking recipes are measurements. So you have things like this measuring cup, this set of measuring cups, or this big liquid measure, and of course measuring spoons. And let me tell you, if you're measuring, let's say a cup of flour, a cup in liquid measurements is 8 ounces, but a cup of flour is maybe 5 ounces. So if you think that you can convert just because of what the actual, you know, weight is, it's not gonna be right. A cup of sugar is actually only 7 ounces, it's not 8 ounces. And another thing that can affect what the actual finished weight is how you measure it. So for example, I have this tapioca flour here. If I were to scoop it like this and place it into the measuring cup, it's gonna measure differently than if I just scooped it out like this. It's a lot denser. There's a lot more in there. The other thing that you want to make sure of is if you're going to measure something, you level it off. So for dry ingredients, like this tapioca flour, I'm scooping it in and then I'm leveling it off with the back of the knife. Okay, everybody's probably seen that, but I'm telling you, it makes a difference in your baking. It's just like the difference, it's just like the difference between if you were to pack brown sugar versus just measure it. So I highly recommend finding recipes that have weights. Not all of mine do, because I'm trying to stick with what you guys are the most familiar with. But I'm telling you, if you can convert your recipes, say a recipe calls for a half a cup of tapioca starch, then just weigh it out. And scales are cheap, okay? I think this guy is like maybe $10 on Amazon, and it goes up to about 2 pounds. And this one is my professional scale. It goes up to 5 pounds. I use it for, you know, the bigger volume recipes when I was baking. But both of these guys come with a tare button. So what you could do is, if you're trying to convert your recipes to weights instead of measures, is you would put your half cup or whatever your measuring piece is and hit the tare button, and now that's 0. Now you can go ahead and measure out your ingredient. I'm making sure it's nice and level. And put that on the scale. And it's 2.1 ounces. A half a cup is 4 ounces. So definitely make sure that you're converting your ingredients, because every dry ingredient is going to weigh differently. And if you get used to using a scale and weighing everything, you're gonna find that your recipes are gonna be more consistent. They're gonna taste better, because that's probably how the recipe developer did it in the first place and then switched it back to measurements for your convenience. So if you wanna try that, I highly recommend doing it. I think it's so worthwhile, and it's so much more accurate. And I love my scale. Another thing is the difference between these dry cups and a liquid measurement. So not only are you going by what the ounce mark is, but typically if you try to do liquid ingredients in one of these, and I've been known to do it because I get lazy too, you can't fill this to the top and get it from wherever your ingredient is, the liquid, water, milk, whatever, to your mixer or your mixing bowl without a little bit leaking out. So this is never gonna be a quarter cup or a half a cup or whatever you're using of liquid. So that's why you always wanna use a liquid measuring cup. This is a 4-cup measure. It has quarter increments on one side and it has metric on the other. So these are good investments. Definitely look into these kinds of things, because with the right tools, your baking is always gonna be much better. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about today is, because we're doing grain-free baking, a lot of times recipes call for baking powder. Now, if you don't know the difference, I'll tell you. This is a little lecture series today. Baking soda is a chemical leavener, okay? It's the base for baking powder. So the difference between baking soda and baking powder is baking soda only needs acid to activate. So if you remember your science projects with the volcanoes, you put a little baking soda, a little vinegar, the vinegar is acidic, right? And poof, explode. That's what you're looking for in your baking. You want that explosion of carbon dioxide, which is what's gonna give your cookies and your cakes lift and make them nice and airy and chewable inside. Otherwise, they're gonna be hard as a rock. Baking powder essentially does the same thing, but it's double acting. So it already has the acid base. The problem with most baking powders, if you wanna do grain-free baking, is they have cornstarch, and corn is a grain. So to avoid cornstarch, you can make your own baking powder with cream of tartar. Cream of tartar is a stabilizer. It's an all-natural ingredient. It's basically coming from the grapes process. So if you're making wine and the grapes are aging, then this white powdery stuff is what's stuck on the bottom of the barrels as part of the sediment. So it's completely natural, and it is an acid base. So you can mix this with baking powder, with baking soda, to make your own baking powder, and it's grain-free, and it's natural. So typically the ratio would be 2-to-1 baking soda to cream of tartar. If your recipe calls for both baking soda and baking powder, then you would substitute this with the baking soda for your baking powder, and then you would do the additional baking soda to equal the same thing in your recipe. If that's too much or too fast, go back and watch it again. So let me give those tarts another look, because I think the timer's gonna go off any second. Hang on. We still have a couple of minutes on those. So what I'd like to show you now is a cookie. This is a chocolate chunk cookie that's completely grain-free. Again, I'm not gonna go through the whole process because you already know how to bake cookies, I'm sure. If there's anything you know, it's how to bake cookies. But I wanna show you the ingredients because they're unique. I'm using coconut flour. It's only a 1/4 cup. I'm using organic coconut sugar. It's like one step up from brown sugar. It looks like this, and it smells just like brown sugar, but it's not processed, and it doesn't have the molasses added. So it's gonna be naturally sweet, it's organic, and you can feel better about using this kind of sugar. That's why I'm really trying to convert a lot of my baking recipes to ingredients like this, honey, maple syrup, more natural types of sugar. If I'm using sugar at all, like those berry tarts don't need sugar, and the banana bread that I make, no sugar. The banana's enough sweetener, and nobody knows the difference. Almond butter, this is an organic almond butter. The jar got a little squished. From Costco. It's the creamy kind. If you like the crunchy kind, that works in the recipe too. And a couple of eggs, and that is all there is to this recipe. Let's put this over here. So you would mix all that together just like you would any other cookie batter. And I saved a little bit here because I want to show you I'm using my red portion scoop to scoop the cookies. And I saved a little batter, so I'm just going to insert it into the batter and make sure it's really flat. This is the messy part. So it's flat. And then I just drop it onto the sheet. Look at that. Every cookie's gonna come out exactly the same. And then, just to kind of help them with baking evenly, I wet my fingers a little bit and I just give it a gentle press. And those will go in the oven for about 10 to 12 minutes. And I hear my berry tarts. Let's see how those are looking. Be right back. And these are perfect. It's going to be hard to see, but the juice is bubbling. That, I can hear them bubbling. You have to listen for it. It's like the ocean. That crumb crust got nice and toasty on top. We're gonna let these cool completely, and then we'll just use a little bit of knife to run around the edges. And I have my handy cooling rack over here, but you know, if you have a couple of those cork pads or something like that to keep the heat off your counter. This counter is wood, so I can put almost anything on it and it's not gonna damage it. The last thing I wanted to talk to you about with the cookies is this chocolate. Now this is my favorite chocolate. It's not available to people in like the retail world, but it is a 72%. It's a single origin chocolate, and that's just like wine where you have a single vineyard wine where all the grapes come from the same vineyard. All of the cocoa beans come from the same plantation, and it's grown in Ariba. It's a 72%, which means the cocoa mass, which is the cocoa solids and the cocoa butter, when they put them together, equals 72%. The rest of the ingredients are gonna be cane sugar, which is very minimally processed, And gosh, I think that's it on this one. Some chocolates will have an emulsifier. You have to look for that. If the ingredients say cocoa liquor, don't buy it. If the ingredients say cocoa mass, you're good. Don't buy soy emulsifiers. They're cheap and they make the cocoa just have a really funky flavor. And oh, these are probably gonna have some additional cocoa butter added in, which is what gives it that nice unctuous mouthfeel. These are gonna melt at room temperature or at body temperature. When you put this in your mouth, you don't wanna bite it. You just wanna kind of let it melt on your tongue, and that flavor will last forever. It's something that is unforgettable. This company makes single origin chocolates from all around the world. It's called Falkland. They used to be a company that I worked for, and it's still my absolute favorite brand in the whole world. So I'm sorry that you can't get it. You might be able to find it online. If I can figure that out, I'll post a link for it. But my point is to just find a really good quality chocolate with minimal sugar, okay? The next thing is those finished cookies. So here's my cookies. I baked these off earlier. I let them cool. I wrapped them a little bit so they don't get dry. And that recipe that's gonna be on the website will yield about 10 or 12 cookies at this size. You can see they got nice and puffy, and all they have in them is the baking soda. They've got these nice chocolate chunks inside. They're nice and cakey, but they're chewy. And what we're gonna do with these is make a little ice cream sandwich. And if your friends didn't love you before, they're gonna never leave your house now. So I'm just taking the blue scoop, which is, I don't remember these sizes anymore. The blue scoop is gonna be 2 ounces. So let's make a big fat ice cream sandwich. I'm gonna scoop the ice cream. Make sure it's packed really tight. It's still a little cold, so it's not gonna be super creamy yet. Just gonna put that on the back of this cookie. And then I'm gonna use my spatula to kind of level it off. Yep. And that'll happen if it's still too cold. Sorry, I probably should have pulled it out earlier. But I have one for you already done. So I'm just gonna flatten that out, and then I'll put the other cookie on top. And then you can go around the edges with your spatula and make it nice and even. And again, if the ice cream's a little softer, let me show you. Because I have one that I prepped earlier. And you can even wrap them in some nice paper like this, so they feel like they came right from the ice cream man, but they came from you. And I just used some of this parchment paper, folded it up around the ice cream sandwich, and there you go. And this cookie is not gonna be like that rock hard cookie when you bite into a store-bought ice cream sandwich and it's so crumbly that you crack the cookie in half and then the ice cream's dripping everywhere. This is gonna hold together really well. Look how nice and thick that ice cream is. And they're all gonna be a consistent size because we're using this scoop. And the ice cream is also delicious on the berry tarts. I'm gonna take a chance here on live camera and try and get one of those out of the pan for you. They might still be a little warm, but I think it's worth trying. You see those? Who else is here? Let me see who else is here. Hi, Michelle. Yum, I'm sorry I missed our walk this morning. So what I'm gonna do is take a pointed knife, just gonna run my knife around the edges of this tart shell a little bit to release it from the edges. If you can see that, I think you can. And it feels like it's gonna pop right out. It might still be a little warm. You really want these to cool all the way. And then I'm just gonna use my little offset spatula. You can use a butter knife. Again, hopefully it doesn't break. I I just went, nope, it's gonna break. It's not gonna come out. All right, let me do this. Here's one I made a couple days ago. Nope. And a little scoop of ice cream right on top. And my scoop is not cooperating today either. There we go. You don't have to tell your friends that it's natural sugar and that it's paleo. This honey ice cream is to die for. It blends perfectly with the little tartness of the fruit. You've got your nice, thick, rich ice cream sandwiches and some fun things for the 4th of July. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, text me, call me, whatever you need. Be sure to sign up for the newsletter. All these recipes will be in the newsletter later today. Actually, it comes out tomorrow, and later today on the website. So thanks for joining me. Happy 4th of July. Love you.